Take my word for it. I live there. Come to Florida. Get pre-approved right now with my guy Michael Kotze. Call him at 561-441-2730. He's got Choice Mortgage and a great real estate team. Get pre-approved right now. Michael Kotze, 561-441-2730. Buy in Florida right now. Don't wait. Save money on state taxes. Make your move today with Choice Mortgage. Trust me, Florida is waiting. This guy's so good, he did my commercials in Florida too. Mike Kotze, 561-441-2730. A ride.
Hi, this is Joe from Vanta. In today's digital world, compliance regulations are changing constantly, and earning customer trust has never mattered more. Vanta helps companies get compliant fast and stay secure with the most advanced AI, automation, and continuous monitoring out there. So whether you're a startup going for your first SOC 2 or ISO 27001, or a growing enterprise managing vendor risk, Vanta makes it quick, easy, and scalable. And I'm not just saying that because I work here. Get started at Vanta.com.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
President Donald Trump has released a 28-point peace plan that will bring an end to the war between Russia and Ukraine. He's demanding that both sides get on board, as there will never be a better opportunity for peace than there is right now. For those who insist that we have an obligation to defend Ukraine, they seem to forget that when the Russians agreed to the reunification of East and West Germany, we signed an agreement with the Soviets called the Budapest Memorandum, in which we, the United States, signed by Secretary of State James A. Baker III on behalf of our country, agreed not to push Ukraine into NATO, which is to say, not to mount NATO missiles paid for by U.S. taxpayers aimed at Russia. We reaffirmed our agreement not to do this in the Minsk Accords. Therefore, the action by the Biden administration to push NATO, Ukraine membership for NATO into NATO is a violation of those agreements and the reason for this war. This idea that Putin wants to gobble up all of Ukraine and then Germany and then France and then Poland is nonsensical. The decision, as put forward by Trump, I should say, the deal would reaffirm Ukraine's sovereignty, would achieve a non-aggression pact between Russia, Ukraine, and Europe, would stop Russia from incurring into Europe, would facilitate better relations with Russia and the NATO nations, would give security guarantees to Ukraine in the event that Russia violated the agreement, would limit Ukrainians' military buildup, keeps Ukraine out of NATO, consistent with two signed agreements we have with the Russians previously, but it also stations European fighter jets in Poland. It reinstates democratic elections in Ukraine, which I assure you Zelensky does not want, having postponed them indefinitely. So don't tell me this fight is about democracy. It would invest considerable resources into rebuilding Ukraine, as much as $10 billion, which is currently sanctioned funds in the United States that belong to Russia, would reintegrate Russia into the global economy, would extend nuclear non-proliferation treaties between the nations, would split nuclear power between Russia and Ukraine, and start the de-radicalization process. In my opinion, President Trump has created a fair and equitable deal that both Russia and Ukraine should be able to agree upon. Now, he's given them both a deadline of this Thursday. That's Thanksgiving. President Trump is done spending billions of dollars, much of which, by his own admission, is being stolen, and is exerting maximum pressure to finalize this deal. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is reportedly not happy about it, as ending the war would end his spigot of welfare from the United States and a lesser amount from our European allies. No more golden-plated toilets for him and his cronies. By the way, I went down and saw his multi-million-dollar condominium in Miami. How does a politician afford that? Zelensky said, now the pressure on Ukraine is one of the most difficult. Now Ukraine must find itself facing a very difficult choice, either loss of dignity or the risk of losing a key party. No, it's the loss of the millions of dollars that we have been raining on him with very little accountability. As President Trump famously told Zelensky, he does not hold the cards. The only thing Zelensky has going for him is no shame and no concern for the welfare of his own people. He'll throw away as many of them as necessary, showing them into the meat grinder of war to fuel this power trip and his vices, even though he knows this war is lost. My opinion, it's time for President Trump to cut Zelensky off, regardless of whether or not he accepts the peace deal on Thanksgiving. For those out there who want to call me a Russian stooge, let me remind you, my relatives were killed on the streets of Budapest in 1956 by Russian tanks. I have no affinity for Putin, the Russians, and my entire political background is rooted in my anti-communism. But we have spent too much on this war, and too many people have died. It is time to end the war. Meanwhile, after a bombshell report by Tucker Carlson exposing the social media behavior of Thomas Matthew Crooks, the man who the FBI tells us attempted to assassinate President Trump last year in Butler, Pennsylvania, more details are emerging about his social media activity, and I guess it's unsurprising. Crooks referred to himself with the pronouns of they, them on different social media profiles, indicating he identifies as a non-binary or transgendered individual. He also posted frequently on DeviantArt, a community known to be for furries, which is a sexual provision based on role-playing by humans pretending to be animals. Whatever. As Tucker Carlson's report showed, Crooks has also left a continuous string of terrorist threats on various social media profiles throughout the course of the years. An unnamed source who's familiar with Crooks' social media profile said he left a digital trail of violent threats, extremist ideology, and admiration for mass violence. He spoke openly of political assassination, posted under his real name, and was even flagged by other users who mentioned this to law enforcement in their replies. Despite this, his account remained active for more than 5 years and was only removed the day after the attempted shooting of President Donald Trump. None of this online activity was referenced in the final congressional report released in December of 2024, which to me makes the whole thing even more troubling. So the question becomes, why was Thomas Matthew Crooks allowed to say these things on social media without being censored, and why did the feds and authorities want to cover this up? The FBI came out this week and said that their investigations came to the conclusion that Thomas Matthew Crooks acted alone. There was no conspiracy to think of. So as usual, once again, it's the lone nut who did it. So move along, nothing to see here. Back to your regularly scheduled programming. With all due respect to FBI Director Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, this feels like the same old runaround that we would expect from the FBI and other deep state entities in the pre-Trump area. We must demand the truth and find out now how President Trump was almost assassinated. There's clearly much more to the story than we are being told. I have enormous respect for Tucker Carlson for having the courage to put this information forward. Meanwhile, President Trump has ordered an end to the temporary protected status, TPS, of immigrants in the state of Minnesota, and the Somali community is predictably up in arms as a result of this. This comes in response to a City Journal report explaining how welfare fraud in Minneapolis is funding the famous al-Shabaab terror group back in Somalia. A source revealed to the City Journal in Minneapolis that the biggest funder of al-Shabaab is the Minnesota taxpayer, with millions being funneled from fraudulent schemes. Some of that had been discovered in recent months, including misrepresenting the number of autistic children to bilk hundreds of millions of dollars out of Medicare, this money being sent to the coffers of a terrorist group, al-Shabaab, in Somalia. Under Governor Tim Walz, there have been at least 28 different fraud scandals. In these liberal regimes, they're often too scared to investigate any ethnic minority group like Somalis because they fear being labeled as racist. Liberal like Walz want to prop up Somalis in Minnesota as banner citizens and the future of America, when the reality paints a very different grim picture. Import the third world and you become the third world. So by ending this special status for Somalians living in Minnesota, this will impact a very small number of people, roughly 500 people. But it will be an important gesture to the Somalis that their corruption and their theft of U.S. taxpayer money will not be tolerated here. You will not have Sharia law here in America. Here, we live under the U.S. Constitution and the laws passed by both houses of Congress and signed into law by our president. Under Sharia, we will have the rule of the jungle. You will abide by the rule of law and the Constitution if you live in the United States, or you will be locked up and deported if you are here illegally. Those are the options. There will be no more special treatment for foreigners. Meanwhile, two of the most honorable patriots serving this administration, Federal Housing and Finance Agency Director Bill Pulte and Trump pardon attorney Ed Martin, according to NBC, were under investigation by the DOJ. Turns out, however, that this report is just more fake news. This is a collaboratory ruse between the deep state and specifically NBC. We spoke about Ken Dilanian earlier. This is the single most irresponsible distortionist pretending to be a journalist practicing today. A report by Dilanian and his woman partner at NBC claimed that Bill Pulte, the director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, and White House pardon attorney Ed Martin are under investigation based on speculatory claims they've abused their authority in pursuing justice against FBI Director James Comey, Senator Adam Schiff, and Letitia James. According to the reports, the Trump DOJ is investigating Pulte and Martin. This turns out to be categorically false. The Justice Department is not investigating its chief pardon attorney, Ed Martin, or its top housing regulator, Bill Pulte, for their role in probing Senator Adam Schiff. And recent grand jury subpoenas were designed to secure documents about Schiff's mortgages and ascertain their origins. Let's be very clear. Every document being used in the prosecution of New York Attorney General of Letitia James, or potentially in the prosecution of Senator Adam Schiff, or potentially in the prosecution of Congressman Eric Swalwell, can be found online by anyone who has a laptop and half a brain. So there is no leak. We are going to come back to this. Right now, we go to our guest, Larry Schnapp, who is to me, the most respected JFK assassination researcher in the country. We'll be back with Larry after the break.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Roger Stone Show. Yesterday was, of course, once again, the 62nd anniversary of the brutal murder of President John F. Kennedy in the streets of Dallas. Joining us now is the JFK researcher in the country who I respect above all others. I speak, of course, of New York City lawyer Larry Schnapp, who is more knowledgeable on the subject than literally anyone I know, and a man who regards it completely and totally without political bias, taking his research where the facts go. Larry, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Roger. Thank you. Sorry for the delay. I had little phone problems.
No, not at all. We're going to adjust for that. I want to get your reaction to two things. One is this story we saw earlier in the week that, according to Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, who I know you met with not long ago, and hopefully you'll be working more closely with, because she's a true American hero in her pursuit of the missing information we still don't have. There were reports of a CIA whistleblower revealing that there were those in the agency bragging about their efforts to mislead congressional investigators regarding Lee Harvey Oswald's activities in Mexico before President Kennedy was assassinated. What do you make of this, Larry?
Yes, this is Tom Piercy, and we knew about this story a couple years ago. We knew about this fact that he went into this CIA facility in Herndon, Virginia, and they had a special SCIF room for JFK records. And it was a file misfiled in the records he was looking for. He wasn't looking for JFK records. He had previously worked with the State Department. He was working on the Foreign Relations series for the Carter years. And there was this misfiled document, and it was a 50-page IG Inspector General report showing how there was basically a damage assessment saying how they performed with the HSCA. And they were bragging about how they basically fooled them, and no damage had been done. Now, this man was afraid of releasing his name all these years, but particularly during the Biden administration, because he feared he was going to be prosecuted, as you know. And once President Trump issued his executive order, he now became free enough to actually put his name to the story. And he's a very credible person. And I think CIA Director Rutledge needs to get to the bottom of this. And if there's a SCIF full of JFK records, President Trump's order has essentially declassified every record the government has about JFK assassination. Those records should be released immediately.
Yeah, I think you were the one who pointed out to me that as good as the president's order was, it wasn't really sufficiently broad, meaning it ordered the National Archives to make everything public. But as you pointed out to me, there are various bureaus and elements in our government who still have records regarding the assassination that they never turned over to the National Archives.
That is true, and in the lawsuit that I'm co-counsel to with Mary Farrell, we're going to be amending our complaint and take the litigation position that President Trump's order is broad enough. It's the way it's been implemented they've been focusing on the records in the JFK collection, which are the records that are in the possession of the National Archives. But President Trump said that he determined that it's in the public interest for all records to be released that pertain to the JFK assassination. So we're going to take the litigation position that it applies to all records. But the energy has been focused so far on releasing the records in the collection. But these are records that were never turned over to CIA. In fact, there's a memo that was uncovered which indicated they had provided a sanitized 3-volume set of records to Professor Blakely when he was head of the HSCA, sanitized versions. And he looked at them and gave them back. A CIA person there said, "Is there any questions you have?" He said, "No." And they said he never found a person that was more uncurious than Robert Blakely. So this set of this SCIF room, we need to get to Director Ratcliffe and get him to let someone get in there and take a look at the records to see what's there.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more of JFK researcher and respected attorney Larry Snapp on the other side.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And we're back. We're talking to Larry Snapp, one of the most respected JFK researchers in the country, a very able New York-based lawyer who's brought a number of lawsuits to compel the U.S. government to release remaining JFK assassination records in the past, and I believe is doing the same today. Larry, I want to ask you about an incredible document which you sent me, a document which I have read about but never actually seen until now. This is a top secret report from the U.S. Justice Department reporting on sources in the Soviet Union who summarizing the views of the Soviet government in 1963 to the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And the most shocking revelation in this document is that the KGB, based on their own investigation and sources, believe that Lyndon Baines Johnson was the driving force, as I do, behind the assassination of John Kennedy. What do you make of this document?
Yeah, this was recently declassified. It's from 1966, and Hoover's forwarding this discovery to Marvin Watson at LBJ's office. And the reason I forwarded it to you is because Representative Lunar had recently obtained from the Russians some sort of Russian dossier of about 100-something pages, and it hasn't been translated yet. But I don't think, from what the few people that have looked at it and who have Russian skills that this may not be the document that Hoover was referring to. But apparently the Soviets did a 2-year investigation in 64 and 65 on the assassination. And I don't believe we've seen this, the actual report. We have this memo summarizing what the findings are. But I think this should be brought to the attention of Secretary of State Rubio, and maybe we can get this as part of the Ukraine negotiations. I don't know. I'm just, the Russians appear to be willing to turn over documents to us that they have about the Kennedy assassination. There's still 5 feet of records from the KGB in Minsk. So this might be a very opportune time to try to get these records. But this is kind of a bombshell.
It is a fascinating reading. And then lastly, you have been in the forefront of those who I think have been pointing out a number of documents that are not in the JFK records collection maintained by the National Archives, but which would be absolutely essential to getting a fuller picture of who killed John F. Kennedy. Give us a quick rundown of those, if you would.
Yeah, so when I met with Representative Luna, they asked me for a list of priority documents, and so I sent them to them. And we have talked about some of these in the past, but the leading ones, I think, are the FBI had a sting operation on Carlos Marcello in the mid-1980s, where he was allegedly caught on tape indicating that he was behind the assassination, that he knew Oswald, and that he actually was the one that put Ruby, in Dallas. Marcello was a very strong supporter of LBJ. I mean, he gave him lots of money, both in 1960 and before then. So we need to get these tapes, which were sealed during the Camtex sting operation released. There's also records that the CIA conducted right after the assassination. They apparently did an investigation in Miami of Cuban exiles and Castro supporters. They denied they did this, but from November 63 to March 64, they conducted this investigation. They did daily reports, and when the HSCA was around, this Donald Heath was the one who was in charge of this investigation, advised them of these reports that were sitting in the CIA, in an office in the CIA, and when there was no follow-up, and we didn't know who this man Donald Heath was for all these years because his name was redacted. He died in I think in 2018, and we learned his name then. So those memos should be pulled up. Walter Sheridan did an investigation for Bobby Kennedy, and when the Assassination Review Board tried to get those files that he had deposited with the JFK Library, he had them sent to NBC, and as part of the Garrison investigation, and the ARB actually sued for those records, but then they went out of business and couldn't get them. So we've asked Congresswoman Luna to get copies of those. There are also papers of RFK that he had removed papers from the White House right after the president was shot, and we're trying to get those as well. And then we're trying to get the William Harvey travel records from 1963. This is another news item that occurred since the last time you and I spoke. The records that were released in March, there was a record there showing that Bill Harvey, after he had been relieved relieved from command of the ZR Rifle assassination group, got a certificate from the FAA, which allowed him to travel domestically in the United States without being put on any travel the list of travelers. And there is evidence that he was meeting in Florida with Johnny Roselli in April of '63, was making phone calls to Chicago and to Los Angeles, and had dinner with some Americans who were not undercover, and also paid for a first-class ticket back to Chicago. So what is he doing in the United States working on assassination materials? All these expenses were charged to the assassination effort, the ZR Rifle Group. So this is important information. We never before knew the FAA was involved with this. And leads me to believe that maybe Roselli and David Morales and others were traveling without being on the travel manifest either. So this is an important thing to get. And Representative Luna said she's going to try to get the copies of the transcripts of the interviews that William Manchester took of Bobby Kennedy and Jackie Kennedy for his book, Death of a President. The tapes were sealed at the request of the Kennedy family, not to be released till 2067. But apparently, Representative Luna is tenacious, and she's apparently gotten permission to at least get the transcripts. Right. So we're making progress, but you and I got to talk about getting some other of the agencies moving a little faster. We shouldn't have to rely on Representative Luna, one person, to get all these records released to comply with the order.
Agreed. All right, I'm afraid we have to leave it there. I want to thank our guest, Larry Snaps, for joining us on the day after the 62nd anniversary of the assassination of JFK. Once again, sadly, more questions than answers today. You're listening to The Roger Stone Show, and we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Roger Stone Show. Joining me now is Lori Gregory. Lori Gregory is a health freedom activist. She's actually the woman who brought me into the health freedom movement. She gave me an enormous amount of information regarding the safety and effectiveness of vaccinations, which I found shocking. I learned a great deal from my friendship with her. She's also a very good friend of Secretary of Health and Human Services Robert Kennedy, and she's one of the most knowledgeable people I know in the so-called health freedom space. Lori, welcome to the Roger Stone Show.
Thank you so much, Roger. What an honor it is to be with you, and one of my great moments to be able to share with you what we've known for so long in this long litany of vaccine policy, and we still have a long way to go, unfortunately, but I'm hoping we're going to get there with this administration.
I know that there are some in the health freedom movement who are dissatisfied, I should say, with the progress to date of the Make America Healthy movement, essentially under the leadership of Robert Kennedy, but with the absolute blessings of President Donald Trump. I personally think when you're up against Big Pharma, one of the best funded and most powerful and insidious lobbies in Washington, D.C., that he's making amazing progress. What's your view?
I think we have inches that can add up to feet, and we have to take every win we can get. I also think that we have to look at what's doable, right? I mean, this week we had a lot of folks in Maha getting excited because there was a shift on the CDC website about autism and vaccines. But Roger, if we're going to have accountability in this administration, we're going to have more than this sort of window dressing, which is actually adding to even more confusion because of the language that continues to deny the history of corruption that has led us to this point. So I think we have a short window here where we can accomplish some very important strides. Namely, it would be really incredible if the president could help us enforce the 1986 Act as it was intended. You know, this was passed by Congress and signed into law by Ronald Reagan in 1986. It was supposed to provide swift, generous, and non-adversarial compensation to those who are injured by vaccines. These are veterans in the war on disease. Unfortunately, the history of the act is that it's been just the opposite. It's been extremely adversarial. In some cases, we have injury cases that are lingering for 12 plus years, and it's been anything but generous. And of course, you know, the big elephant in the room is the gutting of removing residual seizure disorder, which is the bucket that all the autism cases used to go into in the 1990s. That was taken off of the vaccine injury table in 1996. And then despite a series of events after that indicating that, we know there's been causation connections, including, Special Master Hastings said in a footnote in 2002, there were 6,000 cases being prepared for vaccine courts that were autism and residual seizure disorder related. He made a footnote that we've always compensated for autism cases as injury table cases, but autism and autism related diagnoses were removed from that table. And now we have, thousands of children that have not been compensated. So there are some things that can be done to correct this. And it wouldn't take a tremendous effort for us to actually get a better performance out of this legislation.
I mean, as you know, up until Mike Pence became vice president, there was a dedicated website where you could go to see how many cases had been filed, how many people had been compensated. When Mike Pence from Indiana, whose entire career was funded by Big Pharma, his career as governor, his career in the House, his ascendancy to the vice presidency, they no longer posted this information online. I'm not sure that the president, God love him, was aware of this. I think he became more broadly aware of the health freedom movement and the excesses and abuses within the health portions of our government in his out years as president, when he was not president. And of course, I still think that his historic alliance with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Built a new potentially permanent governing coalition. But that is only if Republicans can continue to win the votes of those who put making America healthy again in the forefront of their agenda. You make an excellent point regarding the current status of the enforcement of the 1986 Act. This is something that absolutely needs to be done. Generally speaking, I would also like to get your views on the president's other health appointees. What is your view, for example, of our current head of the FDA?
Well, it's a great question. I think we've seen small moves, but I don't think MAHA's expectations are being met. Most of the FDA measures have been around food, and those are all good things. But, let's face it, Roger, the fact that vaccines cause autism is the least kept secret in Washington. Everybody knows, and everybody has known since the early 1990s, that there's a causal relationship between vaccines and autism, and the vaccine court itself has awarded hundreds of millions of dollars for autism. So we have a cover-up that, we can trace back to the 1999 Verstraeten study at the CDC, which shows causation. That led to Simpsonwood, where Verstraeten was instructed to bury it. So, I appreciate the team that Secretary Kennedy has assembled, and I have great hopes, as I know MAHA does. But it's kind of like calling out the emperor for not having clothes. We have to identify that if President Trump truly is going to make autism his most important issue in his administration, then we have to identify better ways to not only define and reestablish this injury on the vaccine table for compensation, but we also have to start releasing the data. We have data that will show clinically as well as in health outcomes. It would provide transparency that would give evidence of causation, which is essential in the vaccine court. So we have a mechanism that we're not utilizing. We have Medicare, Medicaid data. We have data, that is managed by Pfizer, which is the Vaccine Safety Data Link. There's 21 million patients in that database. We have so much access. If we had public access to that data, we could provide the information that is needed to get swifter compensation for the vaccine injured, and we could address this issue of autism once and for all. We have to have compensation for the injured, and the data is the key.
A key question here, and that is it conceivable to you that it is not the vaccination itself that causes autism, but the things that are included, such as mercury, that may be the causation?
Well, there are various ways that autism can present itself. Autism itself was never listed on the table. The description of autism can be autoimmune. There's autism that looks like neuroinflammatory condition. There's autism that's mitochondrial. Experts would need to define and put a notice in the Federal Register that would allow for 30 days to comment in order to properly define, how there is causation connecting the application of vaccines and vaccine injury in its expression for conditions that can at times be diagnosed as autism. And this sort of detailed analysis of not only defining the term, but then figuring out how to identify ways to, put that information into a feedback loop to make better products. A lot of MAHA call for the repeal of the act. They don't think vaccine makers should have any kind of liability protection for their products. But at the end of the day, Roger, it's much easier to fix policy that's broken than to try to reestablish brand new policy. And so enforcing the act and implementing it in its actual the way that it serves the vaccine injured and vaccine court would be a huge win for MAHA. And I would beg to say, actually, that pharma would be relieved because they don't want to give up that fabulous business model of liability protection. So I think that there could be a win-win if President Trump would consider, some of these changes need to be done through a statute, but he could tie that to one of his must-have bills, and that would be to expand the filing window. We have a policy of vaccine injury denial instead of a policy of vaccine injury compensation. We need to make that shift, and making a couple of these tweaks would actually allow for the act to do what it was supposed to do, and it would correct a lot of the brokenness that's been in the system that has created this problem to begin with. All right, we have to leave it there. I want to thank my guest, Lori Gregory, and thank all of you for tuning in today to The Roger Stone Show.
Thanks for listening to The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear The Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder,
what the heck is going on here?
Take my word for it. I live there. Come to Florida. Get pre-approved right now with my guy, Michael Kotze. Call him at 561-441-2730. He's got Choice Mortgage and a great real estate team. Get pre-approved right now. Michael Kotze, 561-441-2730. Buy in Florida right now. Don't wait. Save money on state taxes. Make your move today with Choice Mortgage. Trust me, Florida is waiting. This guy's so good, he did my commercials in Florida, too. Mike Kotze, 561-441-2730. All right.